Today, we are diving into a strategic move so bold, so brilliantly executed, that it caught the most powerful intelligence apparatus in the world completely, and I mean completely off guard. This isn't just a story about a trade deal. What we're looking at is the blueprint for an economic declaration of independence.
Exactly.
Our focus is Canada's radical $244 billion pivot away from decades of dependence on the United States, straight into the arms of the European Union.
And the sources were analyzing leaked memos, internal diplomatic cables. They all described this as a paradigm shift, nothing less.
So our mission here is to really go beyond the headlines.
Right. We need to unpack the timeline, the diplomatic maneuvering, and the core calculation that led to this. We have to understand what Canada gained, what the U.S. lost, and maybe most importantly, why Washington was so spectacularly blind to it all.
The silence from the White House right now is deafening, isn't it?
It is, because the tremors this is causing in Brussels are fundamentally shaking the foundations of North American geopolitics.
Okay, and get this. This is the detail you really need to hold on to.
Yeah.
While President Trump was on TV threatening a crushing 35% tariff on Canada.
A threat designed to paralyze them.
Exactly. While that was happening, Ottawa was quietly finalizing an agreement with 27 European nations. Our sources confirm it. America's intelligence and defense apparatus had no idea it was coming.
They were played. The failure was one of imagination. They thought they were looking at a domestic file, a junior partner.
While Canada was operating on a global chessboard.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's unpack this. How did Canada, a nation that, has long been viewed in Washington as this compliant junior partner, how did they manage to pull this off?
Well, the story, according to these internal documents, it really begins with the complete functional collapse of the relationship.
The bedrock relationship built over a century.
Gone. The source material is brutally honest about it. They detail the shift in the U.S. approach during the Trump administration's second term, characterizing it as nothing short of economic warfare against allies.
Not just rivals, but allies.
That's the key. For decades, the partnership was symbiotic. Now, partners were treated as vassals, and alliances were just transactional conveniences.
And it wasn't just rhetoric, right? We're talking about rear punishing economic acts.
Oh, absolutely. The sources point to a series of breaking points. First, the public humiliation of Canadian leaders on the world stage.
Right.
Then, the punishing 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. And then the constant threat to just dismantle the integrated auto industry, which is the economic engine of entire provinces.
These weren't minor disputes.
No, these were threats aimed at the core stability of the Canadian economy. But the final straw, the moment the political relationship really died, was in July 2025.
35% threat.
That was the sledgehammer. Canada took its usual principled stand at the UN supporting Palestinian statehood, a policy they've had for decades, and Trump retaliated.
With a blanket 35% tariff on everything.
Everything. And our sources emphasize this wasn't a negotiating tactic, it was a signal of absolute power. Submit or we crush you. And that's when Ottawa realized the threat was existential.
So continuing that dependence was just no longer an option.
It was no longer tenable.
And here's where Washington just completely misread the room. They were so focused on the bullying that they missed this quiet, strategic counter-revolution happening in Ottawa.
They did, and it was catalyzed by a crucial change in leadership in January 2025.
Right, President Mark Carney.
Indeed. And the U.S. policy establishment just failed to grasp the shift she represented. This is not a traditional politician. She ran the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England.
She thinks in terms of global capital and risk management.
Exactly. She views the world as a global chessboard of capital and leverage, not just, short-term political wins.
So when she said Canada's era of absolute dependence was over, that wasn't just a speech.
No, that was a risk assessment. It was time for strategic diversification, for sovereignty, and Washington just dismissed it all as rhetoric.
Meanwhile, she was already moving the pieces on the board.
The decisive pieces.
So if that was the motivation, the sheer existential threat, let's talk about the execution. How do you actually turn that anger into a diplomatic weapon?
Yeah.
What was the mechanism?
The first public move was this security and defense partnership signed with the EU in June 2025.
Which American analysts basically ignored.
Right.
They saw it as symbolic boilerplate.
They dismissed it completely. A nice photo-op, nothing more. But they could not have been more wrong. That initial agreement was the legal framework, the foundation for Canada's application to join something much, much bigger.
The real prize. Let's define it. What exactly is SAFE?
SAFE is the security action for Europe. It's the EU's direct answer to relying on an American security guarantee that's become, frankly, unreliable.
So they decided they needed self-sufficiency.
Total self-sufficiency. So they created a financial and industrial titan. We're talking about a 150 billion euro fund. By the time of the agreement, that's a staggering 244 billion Canadian dollars.
Just for defense.
Just for defense.
Huh?
The goal is to make Europe militarily self-sufficient by 2030, building an arsenal missiles, advanced drones, air defense.
And to put that number in perspective for you, that 244 billion is like adding 4 years of Canada's entire current annual defense budget into one single fund.
And the money comes from the EU. It completely changes the scale. Now, the sources are clear. Membership was built like a fortress. The UK, Australia rejected.
Loyal allies locked out.
Locked out. So the question is, how did Canada get the keys?
Right. What was the bargaining chip? It was supposed to be for EU members only.
The breakthrough came December 1st, 2025. Canada's application was fast-tracked, unanimously accepted. And why? Because European leaders saw in Canada everything they desperately needed and knew they couldn't get from the U.S. anymore.
Reliability.
Reliability, technological advancement, a G7 partner that honors its agreements. But more than that, they saw Canada as a secure transatlantic bridge for critical defense supply chains.
A bridge that couldn't be shut down by a political tantrum.
Precisely. And the result is the Maple Leaf is now the only foreign flag flying alongside the 27 EU stars on this project.
Okay, so that brings us to the payoff. Because this isn't just about flags and diplomacy, it's about cold, hard cash being rerouted across the Atlantic. What are the benefits that have sent the American defense lobby into, as the sources call it, apoplectic shock?
Well, the most immediate gain is just massive market access. Canadian firms can now bid on $244 billion worth of contracts across 27 nations. It's deep, long-term integration for the next half-century.
And the contrast is stark.
It's absolute. American giants like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics, they are now completely shut out of the fastest-growing defense market on the planet.
For decades, over 70% of Canadian defense procurement flowed south.
And now that gravitational center has fundamentally shifted. They are on the outside looking in.
Wait a minute, though.
Right.
Europe is fiercely protectionist.
Yeah.
They created SAFE to help their own industries. How did Canada get around the local content rules?
And that is the absolute brilliance of the deal. This is the strategic insight Washington missed. Standard SAFE rules require 65% EU-sourced components. Canada secured unprecedented preferential treatment and exemptions.
What did it look like on paper?
The documents show that in strategically critical sectors where Europe has urgent gaps, we're talking unmanned aerial vehicles, missile guidance, AI-driven cybersecurity Canadian firms can contribute up to 80% of a project's total value.
80%.
80%. This isn't just entry into the market, it's a competitive advantage Europe granted specifically to Canada because of our technological competence and, crucially, our political reliability. They are outsourcing strategic risk to a partner they trust.
So that 80% rule is the industrial hinge of the entire deal.
Yeah.
But what about the financial strategy? This feels bigger than just short-term sales.
It's all about long-term stability, which brings us to the third game, the power of cheap money.
Okay.
The EU has a collective AAA credit rating. It can borrow on global markets at rock-bottom rates. Through SAFE, Europe will lend this money to Canada for defense industrial projects, essentially at cost.
So Canada isn't just getting contracts, it's getting subsidized capital to build the infrastructure to fulfill those contracts.
Precisely. This fuels new factories, R&D, and guarantees thousands of high-paying jobs in Canada, jobs that previously would have gone to Ohio or Texas. It's a fundamental restructuring of Canadian industrial strategy.
And to manage all this, they've set up a permanent institution, the Canadian Defense Investment Agency, the CDIA.
That's the institutional proof of the pivot. It tells the EU, we are committed, we have a mechanism to absorb this investment. This isn't just one leader's policy, this is a national shift.
A direct consequence of a U.S. president prioritizing bullying over partnership. So what does this all mean for the big picture? This is about more than money. It's about power and reordering the Western alliance.
Right. The core failure for Washington is they lost the assumption of dependence. For 80 years, Canada was criticized as a free rider for underspending on defense.
Because it relied on the American umbrella?
Exactly. But when the guarantor of your security becomes the primary source of your instability, a sovereign nation has to make a new, cold calculation.
And that calculation gives Canada something it hasn't had in generations.
Leverage.
Real leverage. For decades, our leaders went to Washington with hat in hand. That era is definitively over
How so?
because the architecture has changed. When a future U.S. president threatens a 35% tariff, President Carney can now calmly point across the Atlantic to 27 nations and $244 billion in contracts. She can state that an economic attack on Canada is now an attack on the security of Europe's critical supply chains.
It completely changes the power calculus on the continent.
Overnight.
Let's talk about that American fallout from the leaked Pentagon memos. This was an institutional intelligence failure. Why were they so blind?
The language in the memos is just damning. They were caught completely flat-footed. The intelligence failed because U.S. policymakers were so used to treating Canada as a domestic file, a predictable northern appendix.
Not an independent global actor. Never. They failed to see Canada was capable of such audacity. They dismissed Mark Carney, the financial strategist, as just another politician. The failure is a damning indictment of their entire worldview.
They just never believed Canada had the will or the ability to forge its own path.
They saw a neighbor to be managed, not a nation to be respected.
Okay, but we have to be clear-eyed about the risks here. This is a massive shift. What are the perils of this new path?
Oh, the challenges are significant. The EU is not a monolith. Navigating the political gridlock and bureaucratic complexity of 27 nations will require incredible diplomatic sophistication.
It's much more complicated than dealing with one superpower.
Far more. But the biggest risk, I think, is the certainty of American retaliation. A wounded giant is dangerous. We have to prepare for potential border slowdowns, regulatory hurdles, maybe even threats to curtail intelligence sharing.
But, and this is the crucial point, right? Despite all those risks, the calculation was made in Ottawa that the greater risk was to continue the old path of total dependence.
Exactly. That is the ultimate price the U.S. paid for treating its allies with contempt. The risk of staying was worse than the risk of leaving.
The deal's done. The ink is dry. Canadian companies will begin bidding on European contracts by spring 2026. Europe is aiming for military self-sufficiency by 2030, fueling a defense spending boom of well over $1 trillion, with the U.S. on the outside looking in.
So here's the thought I'll leave you with. If Canadian predictability has now become our single most valuable strategic asset, an asset worth $244 billion to the European Union, what does that imply about the state of predictability among our traditional allies? And what level of investment will be required for Canada to truly maintain this new independence?
Thank you for diving deep with us into this pivotal moment in geopolitics. We hope this gave you the shortcut to being well informed on this remarkable strategic realignment.